So we're on the last letter of this book. We've done basically all the letters. And this is this compendium of letters from 1772, letters, broadsides, it is 7 of them. And there is a question about who wrote this, who put it together. There was one suggestion, I think Gratz says it's Vilna himself, but or Chaim Volozhin, but that doesn't seem right. The copier, we know who the copier was, right? The copier of at least our version of it is this copier in Brody, the Sofer. But I don't know if he's the one who took these letters and put them together, or were they already put together? Seems to be an assumption they were already put together and he copied them, because he says he's copying them. So this is this last letter is a letter. It's a letter that's not from one city to another, but it seems to be a letter written for the city of Leshenov, and they are faced with the same issue, that there are these Hasidic groups or group in their city that it has a minyan and is doing its own thing at the minyan, and they're upset about it. And Odo Safti Yadi Lahatik Takanot Min Kihila Na Chamuda Kilashaleshnov. So this, I guess, is either the author or the copier who is saying, I'm also adding this letter from the city, the heads of the city of Leshenov, that they made a boundary in their city against Katleitzin. Now here, this is a new word. I mean, we haven't seen the Chasidim called Leitzin. A Leitz is, like in modern Hebrew, means a clown or somebody who's frivolous. And so here they're calling the Chasidim Leitzim. So the following is the language of the letter. Let's see who it's signed by. And this is signed by the obvious people you would expect: the head of the Bezdin of Leshenov, rabbi, and different rabbis from Leshenov. Now, it's also, it seems to be 2 different cities that were next to each other, Leshenov and Ludmir. And there are rabbis from both. Rabbi Halpern is here. Nobody obvious that I recognize. Raphael Lieberman. Okay. So it's the rabbis of the city who signed this. It was written in the city, and it's these 2 cities next to each other, probably not big cities, and they're writing it as a warning. By Shara'inu Rab, I want to say to Rab, we saw something bad, that there are these groups, merivos. A meriv means a quarrel, but it means it's a group that has, it's basically blaming the group that has broken off, or that's doing something different, for creating machloket, argument. From Chasidim. It's coming from these people that have become known as Chasidim. Shnishka belivim is itgadlus, that they have this bigness in their heart. They have a big image of themselves, that they can just change the nusach. They can change the way that prayer is done. It's been Nusach Ashkenaz here for already, I guess, probably at least 500 years, and they can change. They're changing it. And they're making groups. They're setting themselves separate. Magam Sharabim Heim Midpartzim V'Haku Et Echad Min Harshaim Umanhigim. And even though Magam Sharabim Him Hamit Partzim, I guess he's saying it's large numbers. And it sounds like one of them was beaten. Hiku et echad min harashim umanhigim. Ra'inu lasos lahamid hadavra al machono kfi shegavlu rishonim. Let's just go to it. We have a principle that we're not supposed to separate. You shouldn't have different groups among the Jewish people. Shalotarba machlokets, that you don't have argument. This is a factor in certain halachas. The most obvious one, wearing tefillin on the Chol Hamoed, that in a shul you shouldn't have different people doing different things, so it doesn't look like the Jews are divided. Sinu eza takanot shifarkan, and we are making takanot, we are making decrees against these Chasidim that we're going to explain here in this letter. In order, why are we doing it? Lahashkit hamarivos, in order to stop the quarrels, the shalom al Yisrael, to bring peace on Israel. So that's interesting. At least what they're writing is that, now obviously in every polemic, depends who's writing it, that's how you paint it, as you paint it as a polemic. So they're saying the Chasidim are the one who have created division, and we are making decrees against the Chasidim that they cannot do what they're doing. And what's our intent? We want to stop the division. We want to stop the arguments. We want to stop the quarrel, this disagreements, and we want to bring peace back to Israel. So number one, here's our first gezerah, first decree. Now it's interesting, it wasn't really framed this way as a gezerah in other letters. In the other letters, it was more like, it's so bad that these people are idolaters. In this letter, it seems to be about the worry. The way it's depicted is quarrel, peace, division. We want to quell the division. Okay, and so here's the decrees. So that you can't have, I guess this city of Leshanov was small enough that it sounds like the rabbis in this city, if there was more than one, now there may have only been one rabbi in the city. Remember, a lot of cities, it's not like our cities, every shul had a rabbi. You had a rabbi of the city, and then you had places to daven, kind of like in Israel. So it sounds like Rabbi Yoel is the rabbi of Leshanov, and there's minyanim that are under his jurisdiction. And so we're making a gezerah decree that that's all you can have. You can't have any other ones. Now, if you have guests and they're staying in a hotel, sounds like they could have a minyan. But nobody else is allowed to have a minyan. You have to daven, everybody has to daven, everybody in the city, nobody can make a break-off minyan, nobody can make a backyard minyan. That's what they're saying. You can only daven in a shul or in a base medrash that's already built. The only people that can make their own minyan is if you have a group of guests and they're visiting in the hotel, so they can make a minyan. But nobody else, there's no backyard minyanim, there's no little shtiebel. Probably the base medrash bakness and whatever there was probably wasn't shtiebel, but you can't make your own. It has to be under the rabbi. And nobody, no shliach tzibur, nobody that's leading davening can change the nusach. There's one nusach for the city. That's the decree. It doesn't matter if it's Psukei de Zimra or the Amidah. It can only be nusach Ashkenaz. Now, obviously, the idea, like in our cities, right, we might have a Sephardi minyan, because there's Sephardim living here. The idea of, a Sephardic minyan of people, living in a small town in Eastern Europe in the late 1700s, it was probably unthinkable. Rak Shomer Yisrael, V'Ketores, V'Tfila, LaHashem, V'Hodoi, Achashman, V'Avidoi, V'Tfila, David. So all of these Tachnan, Shomer Yisrael, the section about the Ketores, Tefillah David, Havidoi Achashman Esrei. So it sounds like their Nusach Ashkenaz at the beginning of the Tachnan had Vidoi, which some have. On weekdays, Mutar Mispal Kfim Minig B'Shar Bata Midrashas. You can pray that the regular way. but not a different way. That's number one. So number one is no break off minyanim, no changes to nusach. Basically whatever the Chasidim were doing, that's what they're making gzeira against. Vashtibel katan asamach lebeis medrash hagadol kamkin chalul aser sheminyan. I guess there was a little shtibel next to the shul, the main shul in the town. What that means, why there would be, I don't know. But he says, God forbid to make a minyan there. Rak pa'amim kishiachu lavo samach liyotzer or azai rishus la'asher sham minyan of ofen shaloshan shem nosach klal. So it sounds like there was a little room outside next to the big synagogue where people would go if they came late. It's like we have the shul and then, a classroom and a social hall. So they didn't have, the buildings weren't connected, but that's what they have. So if people came late and it was already after Baruch Hu, so they could make their own minyan. I don't know, it's a weekday or Shabbos. And they could make their own minyan in the shti. But that's obviously what was happening constantly. And so he says, we're not changing that. That's not called, in other words, the overflow from the main shul into the little building next door to it is not called its own. That doesn't fall under the gzeira. That's not right, because that's our people. That's not. It's obvious why that's not a problem. As long as they don't change their nusach, right? In other words, they don't want the Chasidim piling into the little side building and saying, okay, it's okay because it's part of the base medrash, part of the big shul. That doesn't work. Benita and Shal Shudas b'Shabbos. Right now, obviously, from the gezeiras, you see what people are worried about. Now, obviously, the biggest worry is that obviously one of the things is that they're making their own communities or their own minyanim. Benita and Shal Shudas b'Shabbos. Shal Shudas. Gam shari suda she'osim la'atzmam kol b'nei akila, and also other meals that individuals make. That sounds like they're making a gezeira here that is pretty far-reaching into people's homes. Chalila lahazmin alehem min anshe akat rak shnai mehem. Okay, so this is pretty wild. I mean, you see the extent of the power that a kehila had in Eastern Europe in the 1700s. So they can tell people what to do in their own homes. They're saying, if you want to have Chasidim over for a Shabbos meal, you can only have two. You can't have more than that. You can only have two at a time. Why is that? Levad bris, why is that? I guess the worry is that if you have a bunch, they're going to establish something. I don't know. Levad bris mila, if it's a bris or a wedding, so then if you want to have more, you could have more, right? All your cousins are Chasidim, you can have them. Levad sheli yashuvu shnaim yachdav. As long as two of the Chasidim don't sit next to each other. Rak nifradim b'richuk makam. You have to sit them in different parts of the room.
Well, I don't know. From my personal experience, you put too many of them sitting next to each other, they start humming their tunes.
Exactly.
Or repeating divrei Torah from their leaders.
That seems to be the fear. That's wild. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so that seems to right. There's incredible fear here. What is it fear of? I mean, it's made, right? It's just, when you come from our perspective, what are they afraid of? Well, they're afraid, who knows what could happen? They could, right, exactly, sing their own tunes, change the nusach. They cannot change things according to their custom. They can't turn things upside down like is their custom. What is that? Rashem lamata raglaim lamala, handstands. Kederach shahaleitzanim osim, like the leitzanim do, like the clowns do. So now, and you see again this thing about the handstands. What was that about? So is that about sort of you have a lot of Chassidish stories about things like that, where the Chasidim don't want to be depressed on, Tisha B'Av, so they start, there's a famous story, I think, about the Kutzker shul, that there was a skylight. So the Chasidim went on the roof, threw down a rope and started, pulling people up, but they pulled the Rebbe up and then they got so scared they dropped him. So, is it that they want to, there is a tremendous stress in Chassidut to stay away from depression. I mean, Rabbi Nachman, he would, he was a fan of doing, things like this. Absolutely. That because joy is everything. So that's, to us, it's more normative because in a certain sense, we live at a time when Chassidut has become mainstream and is mainstream, if not seen as more righteous. The idea that a Jew should always be happy, Rabbi Nachman's quote, I mean, that's on every, we all know that. And that's taken for granted. But at this moment, all of a sudden, it's an enormous change, seen as quasi-Sabbatian. Now, I did some research, and it seems like, now you ask yourself, sort of, what's the Vilna Gaon's opposition to things like this? Why is the Vilna Gaon so fearful about people standing on their heads? What is that about? So like we saw with them saying ba in the middle of davening, or the fantasy that they're saying ba, I don't know if it was really true, and that is a reference to Shabtai Tzvi, because if it's with a hey, it's Shabtai Tzvi in the code of Atbash. It seems that the Vilna Gaon thinks that standing on your head is a reference to something Kabbalistic, something called Hisapchus Hamidos, the turning on its head of the midot of God, of the sfirot. There's some kind of, I'm trying to figure out what it is. I've seen it referenced in a couple of places. And there seems to be one academic Hebrew article about it, that there was this thing called this physical manifestation of standing on your head was actually a way of channeling some kind of, now I can't imagine this is why the average chassid's doing it, but the Vilna Gaon thinks there's something to it. Has something to do with the sfirot and turning them on their heads. I'm trying to find some more information about it. Gamasurim berikudim u'mecholos. They are not allowed to dance. No dancing in circles. Take of achar beis hamedrash, v'chuyavim achar birchas hamazon, v'chuyavim otam anshe akat leilach beitam. And right after benching, get them out of there. They can't stay. Who knows what could happen if they stay after benching? V'motzei Shabbos chalila lahakat leilach eitzel hashatz. And on Motzei Shabbos, God forbid, to let the group go after the Shliach Tzibur. Sure exactly what it means by that. Rak shnei anashim yu etzlam al shalosh sudas chutz mibnei beisel. But two people should be near them during shalosh sudas, besides the people in their home. Now, it sounds like you can't let them be alone for shalosh sudas. No. This must not be Shliach Tzibur. This must be. It's Motzei Shabbos Chalila Hakat Melech Eitzel Hashatz. On Motzei Shabbos, God forbid, to let the group go to the Shat sounds like Shliach Tzibur, the one leading the davening. Rak shnei anashim shiyu etzlo, the two men who have been staying with you, I guess, who you've invited for Shalosh Shudas. Oh, only Rak shnei anashim shiyu etzlo Shalosh Shudas chutz mibnei beisel. Not sure. It sounds it's a little hard to understand. It sounds like an additional warning not to invite more than two for Shalosh Shudas. I'll just read number 4, and we'll stop. God forbid, Chalila laotan hanashim hayodim, that those people who we're talking about, the Chasidim, that God forbid we should not let them raise up their voices during davening more than is required, that they shouldn't confuse the prayers. In other words, I guess what they're saying is they're realizing that if they make a gzeira, that the Chasidim can only daven with them and not in their own minyanim, so then they're going to need to control them during the davening, because what's going to happen? There's a worry, obviously, that they're going to start raising their own voices during the davening and I don't know, take over, something like that. So it's you can see the fear building, it's there's a lot of fear, and and there's more letters. I mean, there's this book, then there's another compendium of letters from 3 years later in 1781. Some of those are in Yiddish, some of those are in English, and there's like 1 or 2 other compendia of letters and broadsides going all the way for another 30, 40 years. I mean, this was not short-lived, this war. Now, I think so I want to take a quick look at some of those, but I think what's also important to look at is the other side of the coin. What are the early Chasidim writing about this? Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi, we do have some of his letters kind of responding to these things. So we'll see, hopefully, from that also. It's such a different mindset, we just live in such a different world. But you can understand, for communication, it's not a global village. It's people have been living in one town for 500 years and doing one thing. And Shabtai Tzvi, does loom large. Okay, have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.